Have you ever looked into the eyes of the person who promised to love you forever, only to find a cold, mocking stranger staring back? They say the deepest wounds don't come from your enemies. They come from the people you trusted with your flaws, your fears, and your heart. That was the realization that hit me on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The air inside our living room felt heavy, suffocating. I sat on the edge of the worn-out fabric sofa, clutching a medical report in my trembling hands. My vision blurred as tears welled up, threatening to spill over. The words on the paper were clear, devastating, and final. Across from me stood Julian. Julian, my husband of 4 years. The man I had supported through 3 failed business ventures. The man whose student loans I had helped pay off by working double shifts at the clinic until my feet bled. He wasn't looking at me with comfort. He wasn't reaching out to hold my shaking hands. Instead, he was looking at his phone, a faint, amused smirk playing on his lips. "Julian, please?" I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of my grief. "Did you hear what the doctor said? The treatment failed. We can't. We might never have a family. And the medical bills from this round alone have completely wiped out my personal savings." Julian finally looked up, but there was no warmth in his eyes. He let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound so casual it felt like a slap to my face. "Oh, Clara, come on," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Are we really doing this drama again? Every single week it's a new crisis with you. You're broken, all right? I get it. Your body couldn't handle it. But why do I have to keep suffering through your pity parties? You spent the money on a gamble and you lost. Don't expect me to sit here and cry with you." The words felt like physical blows. Broken. He called me broken. "Julian, it was our dream," I choked out, a tear finally escaping and racing down my cheek. "You said we were in this together." "Yeah, well, dreams change when they start costing too much," Julian replied coldly, stepping past me to grab his coat from the rack. "I'm going out. I need some actual positive energy around me for once. Try to clean yourself up before I get back. It's exhausting coming home to a ghost." The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the sudden, deafening silence of the house. I sank down onto the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The coldness of his departure was worse than the medical news itself. How had the man who once wrote me love letters on napkins turned into someone who could mock my deepest agony? But as I sat there on the cold floor, surrounded by the ruins of my happiness, a tiny spark ignited deep within my chest. It wasn't a spark of sadness. It was something else, something sharper, something dangerous. Julian thought I was defeated. He thought my pain made me weak. What he didn't know was that when you push someone past their breaking point, they don't always shatter. Sometimes they harden into glass, sharp enough to cut anyone who dares to tread on them. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, stood up, and looked at the closed door. The crying was over. The mourning was done. Julian wanted to mock my pain? Fine. But he was about to learn that the loudest laughs always happen right before the fall. And I was going to make sure his fall was absolute. To understand how a marriage turns into a battlefield, you have to understand the foundation it was built upon. I met Julian 5 years ago at a charity gala. He was charming, charismatic, and had a way of speaking that made you feel like you were the only person in a crowded room. At the time, I was a senior research analyst at a major pharmaceutical firm, independent, financially secure, and perhaps a bit too naive about the intentions of charming men. Julian presented himself as an ambitious entrepreneur who just needed a lucky break. He was working on a tech startup, full of grand ideas but short on capital. "I just need someone who believes in me, Clara," he had told me on our 3rd date, looking deep into my eyes under the soft glow of city streetlights. "Everyone else just sees the risks. No one sees the vision." I believed him. I fell for the vision, and more importantly, I fell for him. Within a year, we were married. But soon after the wedding, the cracks began to show. Julian's startup didn't just fail. It collapsed because of his sheer negligence. He refused to do the grunt work, preferring to spend money on fancy dinners and high-end networking events to maintain an image. When the investors pulled out, it was my bank account that took the hit. It's just a temporary setback, babe, he'd say, kissing my forehead. We're a team, remember? And because I loved him, I played the part of the perfect teammate. I took on extra consulting projects. I stopped buying things for myself. I gave him access to a joint account to help stabilize his credit. I thought I was investing in our future. I didn't realize I was funding my own downfall. The real shift, however, happened when we decided to try for a family. After a year of no success, we turned to medical specialists. The tests, the appointments, the hormonal treatments, it was an emotional and physical roller coaster. And through it all, Julian's support began to evaporate. He started staying out later, claiming he was building connections for a new venture. When I would ask him to come to the clinic with me, he would make up excuses. I can't miss this meeting, Clara. I'm trying to build an empire for us. You can handle a simple doctor's appointment. But it wasn't just the absence that hurt. It was the subtle shift in his tone. He began dropping passive-aggressive hints about my health. If I was tired from the medications, he would sigh loudly and complain about the messy kitchen. If I expressed anxiety, he would call me unstable or dramatic. The night before that final doctor's appointment, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for an expensive jewelry boutique. It was for a diamond bracelet, one that definitely hadn't ended up on my wrist. When I asked him about it, he laughed it off. It was a corporate gift for a potential investor's wife, Clara. Stop being so paranoid. Your anxiety is getting out of hand. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him because the alternative was too terrifying to face. I was already dealing with the heartbreak of my body failing the treatments. I couldn't handle the thought of my marriage failing too. But sitting alone in the quiet house after he walked out on my grief, the pieces of the puzzle began to align in a horrifying new pattern. The late nights, the missing funds from our joint account that he claimed were for business expenses, the diamond bracelet, the complete lack of empathy for my medical struggle. Julian wasn't just a checked-out husband. He was a predator who had fed off my stability until he found me no longer useful. He looked at my pain not with sorrow, but with annoyance, because a broken wife was no longer a profitable one. I walked over to our shared home office. The room was neat, dominated by Julian's expensive mahogany desk. A desk bought with my bonus check from 2 years ago. I looked at the locked bottom drawer. Julian always kept it locked, claiming it contained proprietary trade secrets for his new consulting firm. A cold certainty washed over me. The answers to my doubts weren't out in the city with Julian. They were right here, locked away in the dark. And it was time to bring them into the light. Breaking into a locked drawer isn't as difficult as the movies make it seem, especially when the lock is a cheap vanity piece on a desk paid for by your own credit card. I found a small paperclip and a tension wrench from an old toolkit in the garage. My hands were steady now, the tears entirely replaced by a cold, calculating focus. Click. The lock gave way with a sickeningly satisfying sound. I pulled the drawer open, expecting to find tax documents, maybe some bad investments, or bank statements showing where our missing savings had gone. Instead, I found a sleek, black leather-bound journal and a secondary burner phone. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I picked up the phone first. It was unlocked. I opened the messaging application, and my world tilted on its axis. There were hundreds of messages stretching back over 8 months. They were from a woman named Evelyn. Evelyn was the daughter of one of the city's prominent real estate moguls, someone Julian had been trying to pitch his consulting services to for nearly a year. But the messages weren't about real estate. Did you tell the liability yet? One text from Evelyn read, dated 3 weeks ago. I'm tired of hiding, Julian. You promised you'd be free of her by the summer. Julian's reply made my stomach turn. Soon, babe. I'm just waiting for the right moment. She's completely drained emotionally right now over this medical stuff. Once the final test fails, she'll be too broken to fight back in a divorce. I'll get the house, and she won't have the energy to contest the asset division. Just give me a few more weeks to wrap things up. I stared at the screen, the breath trapped in my throat. He was waiting for my medical treatments to fail. He was counting on my despair. He was using my deepest personal tragedy as a tactical weapon to leave me penniless and discarded. I opened the black journal. It wasn't a diary. It was a financial ledger. Julian had been systematically transferring money from our joint accounts into an offshore shell company he had set up under a false business name. But that wasn't the worst of it. As I flipped through the pages, I found copies of my own medical files, annotated in Julian's handwriting. He had been consulting with a corrupt legal advisor, tracking my emotional state to build a case that I was mentally unfit and financially reckless due to medical obsession. All to ensure that when he filed for divorce, he would walk away with everything I had worked for, leaving me with nothing but the debt. He hadn't just stopped loving me. He had actively plotted my destruction while sleeping in the bed next to me. He looked at my tears and saw dollar signs. I sat there in the dim light of the office, the phone still glowing in my hand. The shock was intense, a numbness that spread from the tips of my fingers to the center of my chest. But right behind the numbness came an icy, pristine clarity. Julian thought he was the grand architect of a perfect betrayal. He thought he had written the script for my life, a script where I end up broken, broke, and alone while he rides off into the sunset with a wealthy heiress. He forgot one crucial detail. I am a research analyst. My entire career is built on finding patterns, uncovering hidden data, and destroying flaws in complex systems. Julian wasn't a genius mastermind. He was a flawed system full of vulnerabilities. I carefully placed the phone back into the drawer, relocked it exactly as it was, and stood up. I walked to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and washed the remaining tear tracks from my face. The woman who had cried on the couch an hour ago was gone. In her place stood someone Julian had never met, someone he would wish he had never crossed. When Julian returned home later that evening, the house was quiet. The aroma of a home-cooked dinner filled the air, his favorite, a garlic herb roasted chicken. I was in the kitchen, carefully setting the table. He walked in, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and high-end scotch. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly, searching for the broken, weeping woman he had left behind. "Well," he said, taking off his jacket, "look who decided to join the living. I see you finally got over your tantrum." I forced a soft, fragile smile to my lips. I let my shoulders slump slightly, projecting the image of a defeated, submissive wife who had accepted her fate. "You were right, Julian," I said, my voice quiet and properly humbled. "I was being dramatic. The stress just got to me. I'm sorry I took it out on you. You're working so hard for us, and I shouldn't be a burden." Julian's entire posture relaxed. A look of supreme satisfaction crossed his face. He loved this. He loved seeing me diminished. It fed his ego, and more importantly, it confirmed that his plan was working perfectly. "Apology accepted, Clara," he said pompously, walking over and patting my shoulder. "Not a hug, just a patronizing pat. I'm glad you're finally seeing sense. We just need to focus on the future. My business is about to take off, and I need a stable home environment." "Of course," I murmured, keeping my eyes cast downward. "Whatever you need." Over the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the perfect, broken wife to absolute perfection. I became quiet, agreeable, and completely compliant. I handed over the management of our monthly household expenses entirely to him, pretending that the financial stress was too much for me to handle. Julian, blinded by his own arrogance and eagerness to wrap up his scheme, took the bait completely. He became careless. He started leaving his primary phone face up on the table. He spent less time hiding his absences, confident that I was too beaten down to notice or care. But beneath my quiet exterior, my mind was working at a furious pace. Every day, while Julian was out meeting clients, I was gathering evidence. I didn't just need proof of his infidelity. Infidelity alone wouldn't stop him from draining my assets in a clever divorce scheme. I needed proof of his financial fraud. I needed to trace the money he had stolen from our accounts into that offshore shell company. I contacted a forensic accountant, a woman named Sarah who specialized in high-asset divorces and corporate fraud. We met in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, far from anyone Julian might know. When I showed Sarah the copies of the ledger pages I had secretly photographed, along with screenshots of the burner phone messages, her eyes widened. "This isn't just a bad husband, Clara," Sarah said, tapping the documents. "This is systematic asset hiding and corporate fraud. He's transferring funds into a company that doesn't legally exist on U.S. soil, using forged signatures on some of these joint account authorizations. See this signature here?" I looked closely at the document Sarah pointed to. It was a transfer authorization for $50,000 from my personal investment account. The signature at the bottom read Clara Vance. It looked incredibly like my handwriting, but I had never signed that paper. "He forged my name," I whispered, a cold rage boiling under my skin. "He did," Sarah confirmed, "and that is a criminal offense. But if you confront him now, he'll spook. He'll move the money to another account, delete the digital footprint, and claim it was a misunderstanding or a clerical error. We need to let him finish the transfer. He's planning one big final withdrawal before he files for divorce, right?" "Yes," I said, remembering the messages on the burner phone. "He told Evelyn he was wrapping things up in a few weeks." "Then we wait," Sarah said, a fierce smile appearing on her face. "Let him dig his own grave, Clara. And when he's deep enough inside it, we'll hand him the shovel." Revenge is a dish that is best served not just cold, but with absolute legal precision. For the next month, I lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet, grieving wife who spent her hours researching quietly at home or attending fake therapy sessions I invented to give Julian the impression that I was completely incapacitated by my grief. By night, I was a ghost in my own home, documenting every single digital and physical move Julian made. Through Sarah's forensic work, we discovered that Julian's new tech consulting firm was completely hollow. It was a front designed for one specific purpose: to receive a massive investment from Evelyn's father, Marcus Sterling. Marcus Sterling was an old-school billionaire who valued one thing above all else: integrity. He was fiercely protective of his daughter and his family's reputation. Julian had managed to convince Marcus that he was a brilliant, self-made entrepreneur. He could hire expensive lawyers, tie me up in court for years, and use my medical history against me to drag out the process until I was emotionally and financially bankrupt. No, the destruction had to be total. I had to take away his escape routes. I had to dismantle his future with Evelyn, his standing with her father, and his freedom all at the same time. I began by secretly contacting Marcus Sterling's office. I didn't call as Julian's wife. I called as an anonymous whistleblower representing an independent auditing firm, suggesting that Julian's startup was engaging in fraudulent financial reporting to inflate its valuation before the investment contract was signed. Knowing Marcus's reputation for caution, I knew this would trigger an internal, private investigation by his own legal team. I gave them just enough breadcrumbs, specific transaction numbers from Julian's ledger, to whet their appetite. Meanwhile, I made sure Julian felt entirely secure. I even went so far as to sign a power of attorney document he presented to me one evening under the guise of simplifying our tax filings. "It'll just make it easier for me to handle the accountant Clara," he had said, trying to hide the predatory gleam in his eyes as he handed me the pen. "You don't need to stress your head with these numbers anymore." "Thank you, Julian," I said, my voice trembling with faux gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I signed the paper. What Julian didn't know was that the document had been drafted by my own lawyer. It did give him power of attorney, but it contained a hidden clause. Any asset transfers made under this agreement required a 30-day verification period by a third-party bank trustee before becoming irreversible, and any transfer to an offshore entity automatically triggered a fraud alert to the federal authorities. Julian was so arrogant, so convinced that I was a broken tool, that he didn't even read the fine print. He just saw my signature and saw his freedom. The trap was set. Julian had no idea that the cheese he was reaching for was attached to a heavy steel bar. He thought he was playing a game against a beaten opponent. He didn't realize he was sitting across from the Grandmaster. The tension in the house was palpable, at least for me. To Julian, everything was going exactly according to his master plan. He had become so confident that he started openly disrespecting me in small ways, testing the boundaries of my submission. One evening, he invited a few of his business acquaintances over for drinks. Among them, to my utter shock, was Evelyn. He introduced her to me as Evelyn Sterling, a key investor's daughter who is helping me secure the future of the firm. Evelyn looked at me with a mixture of pity and barely concealed disdain. She was wearing a stunning designer dress, and on her wrist sparkled the exact diamond bracelet I had found the receipt for weeks prior. She didn't even try to hide it. She held her glass of wine up, ensuring the diamonds caught the light. "It's so nice to meet you, Clara," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Julian talks about you so much. He says you've been going through a very difficult emotional time. It must be so hard for you to even get out of bed some days." Julian stood just behind her, a smug, self-satisfied grin on his face. He wanted to see if I would snap. He wanted me to make a scene in front of his guests so he could use it as immediate proof of my instability. I looked at Evelyn, then at Julian, and then down at the diamond bracelet on her wrist. I felt a surge of heat in my chest, a powerful wave of anger, but I didn't let it reach my face. I channeled that heat down, compressing it into pure steel resolve. "Yes, it has been challenging," I said softly, looking directly into Evelyn's eyes. "But I'm incredibly fortunate. I have a husband who always ensures everyone gets exactly what they deserve in the end. Don't you agree, Julian?" Julian's grin wavered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of unease passing through his eyes before he laughed it off. "Absolutely, Clara. Everyone gets exactly what's coming to them," he said, raises his glass in a mock toast. Throughout the night, I played the quiet hostess, serving drinks and clearing plates while Julian and Evelyn shared subtle glances and lingering touches when they thought I wasn't looking. It was a masterclass in humiliation, designed to break whatever spirit they thought I had left. But as I watched them from the kitchen, a sense of profound detachment washed over me. I wasn't hurt anymore. The man laughing in the living room wasn't the man I had loved. He was a stranger, a caricature of greed and arrogance. And the woman beside him was just an accomplice in a crime that was about to blow up in their faces. Later that night, after everyone had left, Julian stopped me as I was wiping down the kitchen counter. "You did well tonight, Clara," he said, his voice entirely devoid of affection. "I'm glad you didn't embarrass me. In fact, things are moving faster than I thought with the business. I have a major contract signing with Marcus Sterling this Friday. It's going to change everything." "Friday?" I asked, keeping my back to him so he couldn't see the sudden sharp alignment of my thoughts. Friday was the exact day my lawyer's fraud alert clause would activate if Julian attempted his final asset transfer. "Yes, Friday afternoon," Julian said, walking toward the stairs. "It's going to be a historic day for this family. Make sure my navy suit is pressed. I need to look like a man who has everything under control." "I'll make sure it's perfect, Julian," I said to the empty kitchen. "You're going to look unforgettable." The stage was set. The players were in position. Friday afternoon would be the day the curtain finally came down on Julian's little theater production. And I was going to be the one directing the final act. Thursday was a day of absolute quiet before the storm. Julian was out of the house by 7 a.m., filled with a frantic, nervous energy. He thought it was the excitement of a billionaire's investment. He had no idea it was the momentum of his own destruction carrying him forward. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I went to work. I called Sarah, my forensic accountant, and my legal counsel, Mr. Davis. "Everything is in place, Clara," Mr. Davis informed me over the phone. Marcus Sterling's internal legal team completed their private audit of Julian's company last night. They found the discrepancies we leaked to them. More importantly, they traced the source of Julian's initial startup capital directly back to your forged signature authorizations. Marcus is furious. He realizes Julian was using his daughter to get to his money, while systematically defrauding his own wife. "And the asset transfers?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, and cold. Julian initiated the final transfer of your remaining savings and the equity value of the house into his offshore account about 2 hours ago. Sarah chimed in from the secondary line. He thinks the funds are cleared. But because of the clause you had him sign, the bank held the funds in a security escrow and flagged the transaction as an active fraud attempt. The federal authorities have already been notified. They are moving as we speak. What about the contract signing tomorrow? I inquired. Marcus Sterling hasn't canceled it, Mr. Davis said, a hint of dark amusement in his voice. He wants Julian to show up at his corporate headquarters. He wants Julian to think he's about to sign the deal of his life. He wants to see the look on his face when the trap closes. I want to be there, I said firmly. Clara, it could get chaotic, Mr. Davis warned. I need to be there, Mr. Davis. He mocked my pain. He built his entire plan on the assumption that my grief made me powerless. I want him to look into my eyes when he realizes exactly who brought his world crashing down. There was a brief pause on the line before Mr. Davis responded. Understood. I will arrange it with Marcus Sterling's security. You will be in the adjoining boardroom behind the double-sided glass. You will see everything. After hanging up, I walked through the house one last time. I looked at the photos of us on the mantelpiece, photos of a lie I had lived for years. I took them down one by one and placed them face down in a box. I wasn't angry anymore. I felt an incredible, light freedom. The burden of trying to fix a broken marriage, the burden of blaming myself for our struggles, the burden of my grief. It had all transformed into a singular, immaculate clarity. I went to Julian's closet and pulled out his navy suit. I pressed it carefully, smoothing out every crease, making sure it looked pristine. He wanted to look like a man who had everything under control. I was happy to help him keep up appearances until the very last second. That night, Julian came home late again. He didn't even speak to me. He just walked past me, a wild, victorious look in his eyes, and went straight to bed. He slept like a baby, completely unaware that the walls of his life were closing in around him with every tick of the clock. Friday afternoon arrived, bright and blindingly clear. The glass facade of Sterling Towers towered over the city financial district like a monument to absolute power. I arrived early, dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit. A stark contrast to the fragile, diminished woman Julian thought he had left at home. Mr. Davis met me in the lobby and escorted me up to the executive floor via a private elevator. He led me into a luxurious, dimly lit observation room. In front of me was a massive sheet of double-sided glass, looking directly into Marcus Sterling's main boardroom. Through the glass, I could see Marcus Sterling sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table. He looked imposing, his face an unreadable mask of weathered stone. Beside him sat his chief legal officer and 2 men in plain gray suits whose quiet, authoritative presence screamed federal law enforcement. At exactly 2 p.m., the boardroom doors swung open. In walked Julian. He looked spectacular in his pressed navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, a brilliant, confident smile on his face. Behind him walked Evelyn, looking radiant and proud, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Marcus, Julian said, stepping forward with his hand extended, his voice booming with confidence. Thank you for this opportunity. This is a historic day for Sterling Enterprises and my firm. We're about to change the landscape of tech consulting. Marcus Sterling didn't stand up. He didn't extend his hand. He just stared at Julian, his cold eyes boring into him. Julian's hand hung in the air for a few agonizing seconds before he slowly lowered it, his smile faltering slightly. Is everything all right, Marcus? Julian asked, trying to maintain his easygoing charm. We're ready to sign the final paperwork, right? My legal team confirmed the digital contract drafts were good to go. Marcus looked at his daughter, Evelyn. Evelyn, leave the room. Evelyn blinked, surprised. Dad? What are you talking about? I'm part of this deal. I helped Julian build. Leave the room, Evelyn. Now, Marcus repeated, his voice quiet but carrying a terrifying weight. Evelyn looked at Julian, then at her father's grim expression, and realized something was deeply wrong. Without another word, She turned and hurried out of the boardroom, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor. Julian swallowed hard, loosening his collar slightly. Marcus, if there's an issue with the valuation, we can discuss it. There is no issue with the valuation, Julian, Marcus said calmly, leaning forward and folding his hands on the table. Because there is no deal. There never was. Julian froze. What? I don't understand. Marcus nodded to the chief legal officer, who slid a thick, heavy manila folder across the table. It stopped right in front of Julian. Open it, Marcus commanded. Julian's hands shook slightly as he opened the folder. As he flipped through the pages, the color completely drained from his face. His skin turned a sickly, pale white. The folder contained complete forensic records of his offshore accounts, copies of his ledger, the burner phone text messages detailing his plan to defraud his wife, and, most damning of all, the forged signature documents verified by handwriting experts. You thought you could use my daughter to get to my capital, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the room like a razor. You thought you could present yourself as a brilliant businessman while you were systematically stealing from the woman who supported you for years. You're not an entrepreneur, Julian. You're a thief, a cheap, arrogant fraud. Marcus, please, Julian stammered, his confidence evaporating into pure panic. This is a misunderstanding. My wife, Clara. She's emotionally unstable. She's trying to frame me because of our personal issues. She fabricated these documents. She didn't fabricate anything, Julian, a voice said. Marcus Sterling pressed a button on the table, and the double-sided glass partition slowly began to slide open, revealing the observation room. I stepped forward into the boardroom. Julian stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer terror. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. He took a step back, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Clara, he whispered, his voice trembling. What? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at home. You're supposed to be broken. I finished his sentence for him, my voice steady, resonant, and entirely devoid of fear. I walked toward the table, standing directly across from him. You thought because I was grieving I was blind, Julian. You thought because I trusted you I was stupid. Clara, look at me, Julian pleaded, stepping toward me, his hands raised in a desperate gesture of supplication. We can fix this. This is just a big misunderstanding. I did all of this for us, the offshore company. It was a safety net for our future. I was trying to protect our assets from the medical debts. The medical debts you mocked me for? I asked, looking down at him with pure disdain. The assets you tried to steal by forging my signature? The future you planned to build with Evelyn while you left me with nothing? Julian looked around the room frantically, looking for an escape route, but the two men in plain gray suits stepped forward, effectively blocking the doors. Julian Vance, one of the men said, pulling a badge from his pocket. I am Special Agent Miller with the Federal Financial Fraud Division. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding grand larceny, identity theft, and systematic corporate fraud across state lines. The asset transfers you initiated this morning have been seized and returned to your wife's sole possession. Julian fell back into a chair, his face completely hollowed out by despair. The proud, arrogant man who had laughed at my pain on the couch weeks ago was entirely gone. In his place sat a small, broken criminal, completely crushed by the weight of his own actions. He looked up at me, his eyes welling with tears, actual tears of self-pity. Clara, please, don't do this to me. You loved me. We built a life together. You can't let them take me away. It'll destroy me. I leaned down slightly, looking deep into his terrified eyes, remembering every cold laugh, every dismissive comment, and every tear I had cried while he watched with amusement. You told me that when dreams cost too much, they change, Julian, I said, my voice a quiet whisper that echoed through the silent room. You chose a dream built on betrayal, and this is just the cost of doing business. You get exactly what you deserve. Agent Miller stepped forward, placing his hands on Julian's shoulders and pulling him out of the chair. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the luxurious boardroom, the final, definitive sound of Julian's kingdom turning to dust. As they led him out of the room, Julian turned back to look at me one last time, his mouth open in a silent cry for help. I didn't look away. I watched him go, my heart completely light, the remaining shadows of my past finally dissolving into the bright afternoon light. 2 weeks after the confrontation at Sterling Towers, the house was entirely empty. The furniture had been sold, the moving boxes were packed, and the keys were resting on the kitchen counter. I was leaving the city, starting a new chapter in a coastal town where nobody knew my name, my past, or my pain. The legal proceedings had been swift and absolute. With the mountain of evidence Sarah and Mr. Davis had compiled, Julian's legal team had immediately pushed for a plea bargain. He was currently serving a multi-year sentence in a federal correctional facility for financial fraud and grand theft. Evelyn's father had ensured that his name was completely scrubbed from any association with the scandal, leaving Evelyn humiliated in high society, her reputation tarnished by her association with a convicted con man. I walked out onto the front porch, pulling my coat tight against the cool morning breeze. I looked back at the house that had once felt like a prison of my own despair. People often think that revenge is about anger. They think it's a fiery, explosive emotion that burns everything in its path. But what I learned through this journey is that true justice isn't hot. It's pristine. It's about balance. It's about holding a mirror up to a predator until they are forced to look at their own ugly reflection. Julian didn't lose his freedom because I was vindictive. He lost his freedom because his own greed, his own arrogance, and his absolute lack of empathy created a debt that he eventually had to pay. He thought my pain made me a victim. He forgot that pain can also be a teacher, one that teaches you how to fight back with absolute, devastating precision. As I climbed into my car and started the engine, I looked at the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, the woman looking back at me wasn't tired, wasn't grieving, and wasn't broken. She was whole, she was powerful, and she was entirely free. The drive down the coast was long, filled with the soothing sound of the ocean waves crashing against the cliffs below. The air smelled of salt and fresh possibilities. I bought a small, beautiful cottage overlooking the sea. It had a large garden filled with white roses and a sunlit room that I transformed into a private consulting office. I no longer worked double shifts to fund someone else's vanity. I worked for myself, helping small businesses protect their financial integrity and uncover vulnerabilities in their systems. One afternoon, months later, I received a letter in the mail. It was a formal notification from the prison system, a standard update regarding Julian's status. It contained a small, handwritten note from him that he had been allowed to send through his legal representative. I opened it out of curiosity, sitting on my sun deck with a cup of warm tea. Clara? The note read, the handwriting shaky and uncharacteristically humble. I spend every day in this gray cell thinking about the day I walked out of that living room. I thought I was the smart one. I thought I was winning. I see now that my biggest mistake wasn't the money or Evelyn. It was looking at your strength and mistaking it for weakness. I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you. I read the words slowly, letting them sink in. I looked out at the vast, endless horizon of the ocean. Did I feel a surge of triumph? Did I feel happy seeing him suffer? No, I felt absolutely nothing. And that was the greatest victory of all. The ultimate revenge isn't seeing your enemy suffer indefinitely. The ultimate revenge is reaching a point where their suffering, their apologies, and their existence no longer have any impact on your peace of mind. Julian had become a footnote in a book I had already closed. I stood up, walked over to my small garden fire pit, and dropped the note inside. I watched the paper catch fire, the edges curling into black ash before disappearing into the coastal wind. Every story of betrayal carries a lesson, not just for the person who commits the act, but for the person who survives it. If you are listening to this right now, and you find yourself sitting on a cold floor, holding the ruins of your trust in your hands, I want you to remember something crucial. The people who hurt you, the people who mock your pain, are counting on your despair. They are betting on the assumption that your tears will blind you to their flaws. But tears have a way of clearing your vision if you let them. Your empathy is not a vulnerability. Your capacity to love and trust is not a defect. It is a strength. And when someone mistakes that strength for weakness, they are making a dangerous miscalculation. You don't need to match their cruelty with malice. You just need to match their deception with the absolute, unyielding truth. Justice isn't always instant, and it isn't always easy. It requires patience, strategy, and the courage to stop playing the victim and start playing the architect of your own destiny. Julian thought he had ruined my life when he mocked my pain. He had no idea he had simply unlocked the cage of the most dangerous adversary he would ever face. A woman who had nothing left to lose and everything left to rebuild. The fire in the garden pit went out, leaving nothing but cold gray ash. I smiled.